All right, what's going on, guys? In this one, we're going to be covering the adjustment brush. It's the last tool up here on our toolbar. Looks like the paintbrush, and it functions very similarly to the graduated filter and the radio filter in that when you click it and expand it, you'll notice that it's this familiar screen of all of our sliders that we've been using for these other tools. And it functions in exactly the same way as you might guess. You simply use the brush to paint on a particular area of your screen, and it'll get these sliders. So just, I guess, some quick tips. When you have the brush selected, using the mouse wheel makes it bigger or smaller. If you hold down the shift key while you scroll, you'll increase that feather section, and you can see the related slider down here moving as I hold down shift and move my mouse wheel. And what the feather is if you're not familiar, is it's the space, so that space between the two circles there, that's where the effect gradually falls off. So if your feather's really low like this, it's going to be a hard edge to the brush. Let me just show you an example. That's pretty hard, where if you increase the feather, you can see it's a lot softer. So that is the feather. All right, so the flow slider is basically how much of the effect comes out each time you click. If it's at 100, it's going to get the maximum flow. So if I click here like this, you can see that. And if I turn it down to something like 10 or 15, only a small percentage of the brush is going to come out each time that I click. So you can see as I continue to hold and move the mouse around, it gets darker and darker. So that flow is basically how much of the effect comes out as I click and hold. And you can see if I drag it back up here, it gets pretty dark pretty fast. So that's flow. Those are the basic controls. You have two brushes here. You could have an A and B settings that you can switch back and forth to erase. It's just like it sounds. If you click that and then start to erase, it'll erase the effect. That is pretty much it. Maybe I'll get into range masks in a future video, but basically that's the high level. So basically that's the high level overview of how the brush works. So let's see, I'm gonna delete this point and just kind of walk through a couple examples of where you might use something like this. So in this example, maybe I might want to have a targeted adjustment on these mountains. I might want to add some dehaze just to the mountain, so I can turn my dehaze slider up. And sometimes I like to overdo it at first, kick the slider up so I can see the effect, and then slowly dial it back. I'll put the flow at something like, I don't know, 25, and then I'll just start to paint over these mountains here. And you can see the dehaze effects start to come in. And we're only impacting just where we paint. So we're not applying this dehaze effect to the rest of our picture, where it might add some unneeded saturation and contrast to areas that we don't want it to. So this is probably a use for the adjustment brush in this setting. You might also want to maybe just paint some clarity onto the buildings itself, rather than having to use the clarity slider and have it impact your entire photo. If you want to make a new brush, so on any image, you just click new. Now you can see our old one is still here. If we want to go back to it, if we hover over it, we can see the mask. But right now we clicked new, and now we can do something else, like maybe darken the sky a little bit, like this. I would probably use the graduated filter in this example, but you get the point. And then now we have two edit pins on this page, so then I can go back and forth just by clicking on them. So if I click this one's black, means I can adjust the dehaze, bring it down a little bit. And then if I want to go back to this other pin, I can click that and maybe dial that back just a little bit, like that. So that's that example. Let's take a look at this one. For portraits, what you might want to use the adjustment brush for is something like softening the skin a bit. So maybe I will dial the clarity back. Let's see, put flow maybe at like 30 to start with. and try this out where I'll just start to paint in the areas of the skin that I want to be a little bit softer. Let's see, for time's sake, I'm going fairly quickly here, but again, you get the point. Now we have a little bit of a softening effect on the skin of our portrait. And I, might want to avoid things like the eyes and other areas that I want to try to keep sharp. And you can see, let's try to look at it before and after. You can see before, after. It's very subtle, but it just takes some of the roughness out of the skin, softens it a little bit, and I really like that. Might even tweak this a bit to dial it back a little bit. All right, that's a portrait example. And again, if you hover over the point, you can actually see the mask where you've painted it in, and it looks a little bit lighter up here. So maybe I want to add a little bit more. Hover over again, you can see it got a little bit darker there. So that's a portrait example. Let's see. You can also do some funky creative stuff with the brush. So in this example, maybe we want to kick saturation all the way down. Make sure our flow is all the way up. Make a bigger brush here and just paint out all of the color on the photo. And what I might do in an example like this, I don't tend to like selective color photos, but this is an example where it might be okay. Since the cat is already black, painting around the eyes a little bit here. At first glance, you might not think it's a black and white photo because the eyes are in color. But I think in this example, it works pretty well. Let's see. So you can also use the brush with other masks. So for example, you can have a graduated filter in this photo where, let's see, maybe the sky is just a little bit too bright. Maybe I will tone it down like this. But by bringing the filter down, you can see I'm darkening the little boathouse there. Maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe I want to keep what's in the foreground a little bit brighter. So if I darken the sky like this, while I'm in the graduated filter, if I click brush, it gives me a brush here. And if I hold down the Alt key, just like before with the brush, it gives me the eraser. So you can see the minus symbol there on the brush. Now it's a plus. If I hold down the Alt key, I'm in the eraser mode, and I can start to erase this graduated filter from this boathouse. So I can keep the foreground exposed properly. Again, you can see I'm going a little bit faster here for time's sake in the video, but you get the point. Now, if we hover over this graduated filter, you can see that now the mask is completely avoiding the boathouse. As I take it up and bring it back down, the boathouse stays perfectly exposed for the foreground, and the sky becomes darker. So you can use the brush with these other filters. You can add to the mask, you can remove to the mask and erase, and all that good stuff. So the adjustment brush is a big, important tool. Really lets you target your adjustments specifically where you want them, and gives you a lot more creative freedom as you edit your images. So that's the adjustment brush. Thanks for watching. I will catch you guys in the next one. Cheers.